President Merz, Mr. Chairman, the Rector of the University of St. Gallen, Mr. Mohr, members of the National Council of the Canton of St. Gallen, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow students. It is not long since we, the 24 members of the International Students' Committee, began with our preparations for the 39th St. Gallen Symposium. It is also not long since most of us were assuming that the financial sector's problems in the middle of last year would result in only a slight cooling of the economic climate. Then came the problems at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the nationalization of Commerzbank in Germany, and a downward slide had begun. We now know that we are in a situation which, post-1929, nobody believed could ever happen again. The worst economic crisis for 80 years shows us that our economic system, which in past years has made possible enormous increases in prosperity, is in no way as stable as generally assumed. If anything, it has become fragile. We therefore stand at a crossroads. The decision about the path we should take will have a crucial impact on the world. We must choose whether we wish to continue courageously down the road taken in the post-war era, first by the West and then gradually adopted throughout the whole globe. A road that over the last 30 years has led millions of Chinese out of poverty and made people in the USA wealthier than any other nation had ever been before. But also a road which in Europe, where wars between the different countries had been waged for centuries, led Willy Brandt to say, in reference to German reunification, "Nun wächst endlich zusammen, was zusammengehört. Now at last, that which belongs together can grow together." Despite the current crisis, we must find the courage to go further down this without often rock-strewn road. Ladies and gentlemen, the road I'm talking about is the free market economy and associated globalization. We must decide whether we want to continue down this road, even when headwinds are forecast. It won't be an easy one. There'll be setbacks to endure. But I'm certain that this road is the only possible one, because only this road will lead us to equal opportunities for more people and greater prosperity for all the world. At the present crossroads, there is, however, another one, the easy one. For many, it looks tempting, because in the short term, it's possible it could ease the hardship and the worries. In the long run, however, it would amount to a retrograde step. It implies the establishment of new borders, even the cessation of foreign trade. In so doing, ladies and gentlemen, we would be forgetting that the market economy as a system and our present-day living standards are possible only thanks to international trade across permeable borders and an understanding of other cultures. Some countries, like the US or France, have already gone a few steps down this other road. Driven by an understandable wish to keep jobs at home, principles, and this is hard for me to understand, are being thrown overboard, that before the current crisis actually made our prosperity possible and that were previously never questioned. Accordingly, as a matter of course, sectors are now being supported with billions of dollars in order to save companies from imminent failure. But specifically in a market economy, this very thing should be possible. It would lead to greater trust in the system and greater individual responsibility. All individuals must be able to decide for themselves whether they'd like to buy a product or not, whether they'd like to take a risk or not. The apparatus of the state is in many countries adopting an increasingly Leviathan stance. Neither does it lead to a slimline bureaucracy that can react flexibly to crisis. Rather, it leads to a cumbersome monstrosity that, through an increasing need for financial means, assumes the role of custodian over its citizens. In my view, All individuals must take responsibility for their own action and its consequences. And all must keep the welfare of future generations in mind. In past years, this responsibility has taken a backseat. It was wrong to have offered investment opportunities with insufficient certainty as to the risks they entailed. But it was equally wrong to make investments that one didn't understand. Let's act more in line with Kant's golden rule, which asks that an individual act in a way that can become a maxim for all of mankind. That should not imply that it's inappropriate to aspire to personal prosperity. It means only that Adam Smith is not always right. The aspiration to personal prosperity does not automatically lead to the best result for society. So we need to understand the needs of others better, and even more importantly, in my view, also understand the needs of future generations in order to be able to act with their welfare in mind. It would be wrong if future generations have to pay for the mistakes of the present. It would be wrong to accumulate unprecedented national debt around the world for rescuing the financial system and easing our problems. We would not be solving our problems. We'd only be settling future generations with our debts. That would be wrong. So I say to you, we have to think again. We have to stop striving only for profit and carry a greater responsibility for society. We have to think again, because we will only get the better of this crisis through a basic change in attitude. Armed solely with the same old solutions, we'll have the same old problems in future. We have to think again, and quickly. The current situation cannot be deferred and will not permit lethargy. There's no time to lose. It begins here at the 39th St. Gallen Symposium. What we need are fast, workable solutions for the crisis of today. We have to think again, now. Thank you very much.
President of the Swiss Confederation, Herr Bundespräsident Merz, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure welcoming all of you to the 39th St. Gallen Symposium. Last year's topic of the symposium was global capitalism, local values. Now 1 year of financial and economic turmoil later, the topic of the conference is revival of political and economic boundaries. The financial turmoil and the economic crisis in its wake call for new solutions for the world economy. In the past decade or two, capital markets have outgrown the scale and scope of existing regulation. As a reaction to the crisis, two broad alternative routes are under consideration. First, existing regulation is replaced by a set of consistent, for example, global regulation. Second, economic and political boundaries at the multinational or national level are further strengthened or revived, and the global markets cut back into more or less segmented components. Both solutions have their risks, and we will have ample time to discuss them. Let me make two short comments as an early morning wake-up call, so to speak. The first comment relates to global capital and the sovereign state. The history of sovereign debt has for the last 150 years been a history between mostly powerful creditor nations and weak debtor nations. In the wake of the current financial crisis, we find within the club of debtor nations powerful nations. Some invest billions of future tax revenue to stabilize their national economies in a situation of a growing burden to service international debt at large. That burden comes to the fore at the latest when the inflow of new money begins to fall behind the outflow from servicing old obligations. Given the sovereign and powerful nation-state, can we still believe that in a conflict between international obligations and national interests, it will eventually service its international obligations? Or must we instead get accustomed to a pertinent problem of a fading willingness to do so? In a severe and prolonged economic downturn, can we trust the country not to sacrifice foreign claims to the economic interest of its political constituency? The global capital market is very different in character if governments protect their indebted political constituency. Private Ponzi schemes are illegal in most countries. Ironically, an economy which is servicing international financial obligations only when obtaining sufficient fresh money from abroad is running a national Ponzi scheme. My first comment was an example for the risk from growing economic and political boundaries. That is, from a growing distinction between us and them. My second very short comment is an example of the opposite risk. Voting by feet is only a free vote if there are alternatives to go to. How many alternatives does it take to maintain effective institutional competition? A world without alternatives is paradise for Leviathan. The late medieval history of Europe looks like the history of overcoming the feudal system by a growing number of cities which were an alternative for those suffering from feudal life. I thank this year's International Student Committee under the leadership of Dominik Baumann, Melanie Useus and Claudia Röck for having chosen such a timely topic. As last year, our campus is under reconstruction. For the second year in a row, we will therefore be hosted in the tent village especially built for us. Judging from the splendid reactions we got last year, I foresee, however, a severe problem. You probably do not want to give it up again once reconstruction is finished. I express my gratitude to the International Student Committee for having made that possible. I do wish you inspiring discussions in the coming 3 days, and I sincerely hope you will feel at home at the University of St. Gallen.